Here, this is what it is.
Huh.
So I'm sitting with Warren MacKenzie, who's a World War II vet, and this is an interview on October 30th of 2015, and Warren's been kind enough to sit with us and tell us about his military service. Warren, what branch of military were you involved in?
Well, it's embarrassing because I decided when I was able to be in the Army, if they want me, they can draft me. And sure enough, they did. I was in the Chicago Art Institute at the time as a painting major, because that was what I thought I was going to be. I was going to be a world's greatest painter. And so I got drafted, and the first thing they do with anyone who is in the northern part of the hemisphere is send them to the southern part of the hemisphere or somewhere else, so you're not near your family. And I was sent to Texas. And the funny thing was, down there, I started out to be trained as a tank driver. And a tank driver was a very exciting training, I'll tell you. You know, you've got this beast that you have control over that weighs tons, and all you got to do is pull levers and step on the controls and all. And it was just fascinating. But halfway through my training as a tank driver, I got a call to go to the general's office, and I found in the general's office were about 12 or 15 people who had been told the same thing, and nobody knew why we were there. We finally found out that the Army at that time could not keep up with the printing and the diagrams that were necessary to take care of all of the inductees who were in training and had to learn how to dismantle a rifle, how to do this, how to that, so on. And these required charts and pictures and written things. And so someone decided that they would establish a group of printing offices, if you will, who were capable of providing these things that they needed in quantity. And all of us who were there had something to do with art. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think back on it had something to do with printing or paint or something. One of the fellows had been a house painter, but it showed up on his registration the word paint, and so he was called into this meeting too. And some of them had been professional illustrators, some of them had been students, as I was, and all sorts of things. Anyway, we went into the general's office, and he told us the situation, that they were going to establish a printing plant which could keep up with the demands for the printing that they needed for all the new inductees. And they were establishing about 5 or 6 of these around the United States. Ours happened to be established in Texas. And we had a fellow who was the head of the group, and he'd been a professional illustrator. He could do magazine covers. He could do illustrations for the newspaper or anything. He could draw anything. And I knew something about printing because I had been in an art school and had learned how to make what we call silk screen prints. And that's what we did in our shop. We made silk screen prints of charts or diagrams or whatever they needed that would further the communication with an instructor and a bunch of guys who had no experience with this. And we had a struggle because at that time we were going to print with the silkscreen process, and there were not materials ready-made to transfer your drawing or your illustration or whatever to a silkscreen. Nowadays you can buy a special paper and you simply cut out your drawing on that paper, put it on the silk screen, rub it with damp cloth, and it's there for what you want to print. But we had to learn to make our own silk screen paper, and we did. And we all had different jobs in the shop. And the man who had been a house painter, he was put to work mixing our paints, because he certainly knew how to mix paints. But anyway, somewhere along the line, we had a very good print shop. We supplied everything they needed, and then the Battle of the Bulge came in Europe. And everyone who was in the Army and not doing something that was essential to the Army was told to report to a new base where they would be trained to be a soldier. And so I was sent to Mississippi, and I was trained to be a soldier all over again, learned how to fire a gun, all that. And I was just ready to, I had turned in my equipment and was given a 2-day furlough to visit my family, say goodbye, and then report to the East Coast port of embarkation. And I turned in all my gear, and I was headed for the gate, and the sergeant came out. He flagged me down. He said, "MacKenzie, you're not going." I said, "Why am I not going? I've been through retraining and everything." He said, "Well, your eyesight is not good enough." He said, "You're more of a danger to our own troops than you are to the enemy. Therefore, you're not going to go to Europe." And so I was hauled back, and I spent a little while in a print shop that they had in that particular camp. And I got in a lot of trouble with the guy who was in charge of it, because he thought I was after his job, which was the last thing I wanted to do. But he couldn't draw or paint. And how he got the job as head of this print shop, I'll never know. It turned out he'd worked for the Walt Disney Enterprises. And all he'd done was trace the drawings that they had made for making an animated film. But anyway, we got along all right. And finally, and while I was there, the war ended. Japan surrendered and all. And so again, everyone who was not essential to at least carrying on the peace-giving was told to report into a base, and they were going to relieve all these people who had been fighting all through the war. And I happened to be sent to Japan. You were either sent to Japan or to Europe. I was sent to Japan. And I arrived in Japan. I went to an office that they had there, and the man there, he said, "Well, I've got no job for you just yet, but I'm told that my job is to get a job for every person who comes here that makes them do exactly what they did in the U.S." And I told him, I said, "Well, I was an artist all the time. I was in the Army at the U.S. nobody needs that in an army of occupation. He said, don't worry, just report back and come back in 3 hours. I came back in 3 hours. He said, go away and come back in another 3 hours. And he never did find a job which called for an artist, naturally, in an army of occupation. And I was standing there waiting for him one day, and I heard this voice behind me asking if he could use the telephone of this command post. And it was the voice of a person I will never forget. He had been one of my instructors at the Chicago Art Institute, and he had taught life drawing, and I don't know what else. And I turned around and I said, well, Mr. Ewing, what are you doing here? And he looked at me because he hadn't noticed me before. He said, well, MacKenzie, what are you doing here? And I told him they were trying to find a job that would relieve somebody who had been fighting and all. And he said, well, I'm in charge of a map making outfit, and they've been fighting all the way up the Pacific Ocean. And so they're really ready to go home, and I can't get any replacements for them. So he requested me as a replacement into this map making outfit. And so I'm back into art again in the Army. I never got out of art in the Army. It's really quite fantastic because I wanted to be a soldier, but they wouldn't let me. And so anyway, I was assigned to this map making outfit, and there was no job to make maps in the Army of Occupation. We were told to just sit around, we'll find a job for you, you know. And finally, I guess it was a captain in charge of this outfit. He couldn't find anything for us to do. He said, look, you guys find something for yourself to do. Because somebody's just sitting around here, you're wasting time, you're not doing a thing. He said, we're going to be in real trouble. And so finally somebody came up with the idea that this map-making outfit could draw and make drawings of the Army of Occupation. And the first one we set out was to just dig up wherever you see Army people working and draw them at work. And we were on a sea coast. We saw big boats in the harbor all coming in, going out. We drew that and painted it. And so we had a great time drawing and painting. And then we ended up with a whole mess of paintings that we'd done, drawings, and nobody knew what to do with them. And somebody said, well, what we're going to do is give them to the general. And so they matted them all up, made them look fancy. And they presented this lot to the general in charge of the Army of Occupation. And he saw them, and he liked them very much. And so he said, well, there's got to be some way we turn this into something which the average GI can get and afford. And so since we were in a printing outfit also, which I forgot to say, this map-making outfit was assigned to a printing shop which was run by the Japanese because they had a wonderful print shop behind the racetrack of the Bunchudo racetrack, horse racing track. And behind it, all those seats which have empty space, the Japanese were not going to waste any empty space. They had a whole print shop, and those guys could print anything. They were fantastic. And so we would take our paintings over to them, and they would turn them into prints and print them up. Finally, we ended up with a couple of books, and one was called the 8th Army Engineers in Action, and the other one was called Japan Today, because when we went out drawing and painting, why a lot of times all you see is a bunch of Japanese and pursuing their daily life. And that's what I did in the Army.
Was that like canvas? Was it watercolor? Was
No,
it?
they were anything we'd lay our hands on. Since this outfit was running a printing shop which had fantastic equipment and could print anything you wanted, we took paints, we took watercolors, we took brushes and inks and all, and we had a supply of the most beautiful handmade Japanese paper, which was buried underground at this print shop, and we could have access to that. And some of us drew with ink, some of us drew with paint. Remember, I was just out of art school. I wasn't even out of art school. I was halfway out of art school, so I was not a great painter. And boy, I found all sorts of ways to kind of try to jazz it up and make it look better than it really was. But eventually they printed these 2 books, and they were put for sale in the PXs. And the average soldier, if he wanted to, could buy a whole book about his time in the Army. And that's what I did in the Army.
It's quite a contrast from being a tank driver to being an artist.
Well, that's true, but they could get, I think they could get more tank drivers and better tank drivers than I was. And so I got the art job. Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit more about your experience and the training involved in the tank aspect of your job? How long did that go on for?
Well, when I was drafted in Chicago, immediately I was sent to Texas because that's the furthest away they could get me from my own family. They don't want a bunch of draftees all have to go home to mama and so on. And so we were sent to Texas, and down there it happened they were starting a tank battalion, and so we were assigned to learn to drive a tank. That's all there was to it, and we didn't know anything when we started, but it was exciting, I must say. Those tanks could weigh anything from nothing to a number of tons. And here you are controlling them and trying to learn how to turn them around and back up and do this and do that. And it was great fun. And there was one thing that happened. The tanks had lights on them, but you were told in a blackout, you mustn't use your lights because that will bring aerial bombardment onto your tank group. And so each tank had a couple of little tiny lights on the back side of it. And in a blackout, you were told, follow the tank ahead of you. And you could just barely see the little lights going ahead of you. You couldn't see anything else in the middle of the night. And this went on until one time when one of the lead tanks went over a hill and down a big hill. He got off the road. Well, the tank following did the same thing, and the tank following him did the same thing. And I don't know what they did, but it never happened with my group again, that we're to go through blackout exercises and told, follow the lights ahead of you.
A typical tank crew would be how many?
Well, it could be anywhere from, I think, 2 to about 4. Yeah.
And what types of tanks were they, and what was their weaponry like?
I don't remember. I don't remember. I was assigned as a driver to learn to drive them, sure. And that's what I learned. But each one might have several guys armed or operating cannon that are mounted on the tank. Yeah. the difference between, we had another thing. I just remembered, there was a vehicle called a half-tank during the Second World War. And this was really a gigantic truck with a big cannon mounted on the back of it. And that truck had tank tracks in the rear, but truck tires in the front. And so it could maneuver a little more easily, and it could go faster than most of the tanks, as I remember. But we got trained with those, and when I was, now when did this happen? God, so many things happened during the war. Somehow, although I was told I was essentially a danger to our own men because my eyesight was so bad, I did get sent to Europe. And the funny thing was, we were approaching the German lines on the Danube, and we didn't know what to do because we couldn't get across the Danube in a tank and anything. And so we found we were roaring up and down the banks of the Danube River. And we looked over into Germany, and the Germans were doing exactly the same thing. And they're sure they'd fire a couple of bullets at you, but they weren't doing any real damage because they didn't know what to do. And so that was as close as I ever got to the war. But that was not the war at all. That was just something. All right. Well, this is one of two books which were made at the request of the commanding general there in Japan. We had given him all these paintings we'd made, and he thought there should be some way that they could be available to the average GI. And so our printing plant could take our paintings, and the Japanese who ran this printing plant, you know, all the equipment in the printing plant was Japanese equipment. And so all we were doing was, in a sense, overseeing them and asking if they could do this, and would they do this, would they do this, and would they do that. And they could do anything. And so these books were made up. This one was called Japan Today. The other was called The 8th Army Engineers in Action. And it was about the Army, whereas this one was about the countryside that we found ourselves in after the war was over. You know. So, but the printing plant did a wonderful job of printing them, and this is one of the original books that were there. And inside are all the drawings and paintings that we made and gave to some general because we didn't know what else to do with them. Yeah.
So really, these paintings that you did, they're probably worth far more than your pottery ever was, huh?
Well, yes, in terms of income.
Oh, that's good.
But at least they got them down to a price where the average GI could buy a whole group of paintings, drawings, and all that told about what he'd been going through.
Or been around, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really cool. I didn't know, like, I never even knew that. I didn't know that was like a thing. I didn't know they had like printing divisions. I would think that nowadays they just contract everything out, so.
They would.
Yeah.
Yeah. But these Japanese printers, I used to do all sorts of drawings and paintings because I was really trying to disguise with the paint what I didn't know about drawing, you know?
I get that.
And my God, they could take a painting that was done with watercolor, they would print it, it looks just like a watercolor.
Oh.
They could take a painting that was done with gouache, that's opaque, like watercolor paint, heavier. They'd print that and you would know exactly what it was made with.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
it was just amazing.
It says Tech 4, so you were
Yes.
was that a tech sergeant then?
Yeah,
Okay. So these were yours too?
they look like my drawings, yeah.
Yeah.
I drew everything that was going on around me because I was not a very good painter.
But you know, these originals may be worth a lot of money now if you could find them. They might be worth $1 million.
They're probably somewhere in Washington. That's all
Oh,
I'd say.
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That is really cool.
Really cool.
This guy, Milton Walsky, he could draw like nothing. He was wonderful. He was a wonderful person with pen and ink. And that's one of his drawings that was put in. That's Milton too. All his drawings of a tugboat.
He's really good.
Wooden riverboats have become the homes of many Japanese families since their houses were burned out by incendiary bombs.
Now, you knew some of these people well? The
Who were
art?
drawing?
Yeah.
I knew them very well
Yeah.
because they'd been in this, this print shop that I was working in. Yeah. That was a watercolor painting, and this was printed in the Japanese print shop. So you can see how well they can reproduce a watercolor painting,
Back then? Wow.
or here a pen and ink drawing,
Wow.
another pen and ink.
And these were basically created for the GI to have a little bit of a memory on
Yeah.
on their experience in
Yeah,
Japan.
these books were for sale in the PX. Yeah. This is a big American boat came into dry dock there, and so we drew that.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's nice.
At the watercolor. So there's all sorts of things from
Yeah.
pure just drawings of the Japanese themselves to things of the American services there.
Wow.
I can see I didn't have many. Oh, there's one of my paintings. You see, I was still just a student painter, so I did much simpler paintings than some of the people did.
Let me get a photograph of this one here real quick.
This is a Shinto shrine in Yokohama.
I'm gonna zoom in on this here real quick, just to show.
But I was fascinated by this sort of a building, and so I just painted it.
Yeah.
And they duplicated my painting. Very
That's
nice.
great.
That is great.
That's wonderful.
Oh wow.
There's all different things you ran across. These big lions, stone lions out in front of the building, is safe that the building around the safe had been burned down.
And it's just the
Yeah.
safe standing.
Yeah.
Oh.
Here was a crashed airplane. Yeah.
Wow. And you're saying that a guy found this for you. That is awesome.
Yeah, a guy at the university found this book. I don't know where he got it.
This is another Warren MacKenzie.
Wow.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Well, you can see they're not much as artwork.
There's another one. Boy, you had quite a few in here.
Well, everybody got a lot.
These books have to be pretty rare too, aren't they?
Well, they printed a lot of them at the print shop that we were in. So I don't know.